Is an SABC News presentation.
Good morning and welcome to today's edition of A View from the House. My name is Mkokeli Tanda. The National Assembly is wrapping up its plenary sessions for this quarter. Today will be the last sitting of the National Assembly before Parliament adjourns for the winter recess by the end of next week. But View from the House will continue with coverage from Parliament until next Thursday. Some National Assembly committees still have some work to do, while the NCOP has 2 sessions scheduled for next week. Today we look at questions to the Deputy President on the Syrian issue. We hear how parties have voted for the budget of the presidency, and since the National Assembly is to debate the Youth Day this afternoon, we hear how members of the NCOP felt about youth issues in a rather lively debate last Friday. We go to questions to the Deputy President, Motlanthe. The question deals with South Africa's position on Syria. The Reverend Kenneth Meshwe asked whether government will join the USA, France, Britain, Canada, Germany, Italy, Spain, Australia and Bulgaria in its condemnation of the Syrian government. Reverend Meshwe pointed out that these countries had announced the expulsion of Syrian envoys from their countries as an expression of their outrage at the recent massacres in Syria. In his reply, Deputy President Motlanthe said South Africa's position on the current crisis in Syria was that all parties should adhere to the United Nations-led 6-point plan of the 5th of April 2012. That also applied to the UN Security Council resolution, which provided the opportunity for all Syrian parties to proceed with a Syrian-led national peaceful dialogue towards a lasting political solution in Syria.
South Africa condemns the tragic loss of life of ordinary citizens and the destruction of infrastructure in Syria. In a statement to the United Nations Human Rights Council on the 1st of June 2012, South Africa supported a thorough and immediate investigation into the killings of El Houlair with the full involvement of the United Nations Supervision Mission in Syria and the Commission of Inquiry established by the Human Rights Council. Our position is premised on our conviction that peace and political stability are a precondition for growth and development. So too in the case of Syria, in order for that country to prosper, there's got to be peace and cessation of hostilities as well as political stability.
In his follow-up question, Reverend Meshwe said he agreed with the position taken by government, but nothing seemed to happen to resolve the situation in Syria, not even after former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan had presented the UN plan to the Syrian regime. He wanted to know if South Africa could do more to end the slaughter.
They don't seem to respond. Is there anything else that the Deputy President thinks can be done? Because every day, innocent lives, particularly of women and children, are being lost. Something has to be done to show the expression of the outrage of countries such as ours. Just to say we condemn, obviously anybody in the street can say we condemn, but government should be having the ability to do more in order to put pressure on the Syrian government. We also know that Russia and China are opposed to military intervention as a solution. So what I want to know, Deputy President, is whether, besides what the Deputy President has said, there's anything more that can be done, or will our government just tailor behind China and Russia regarding the issue of military intervention? Thank you.
Deputy President Motlanthe said it only needed 1 permanent member of the Security Council to block a resolution, no matter how all other member states felt about it. That is now the case with regard to Syria.
Trust among the permanent members has been eroded by the manner in which questions of Iraq, questions of Libya were dealt with. And so we are in a situation where some of the permanent members are indeed mobilizing and frustrated, and others are of the view that there should be no regime change. And so what you are alluding to, for instance, military intervention, it has to be done within the auspices of the United Nations Security Council, so that its mandate, if forces are to go in there, it should be peacemaking forces capable of keeping the peace as well, once the peace is being attained. Because at the moment, it's almost a civil war flaring up there.
Deputy President Motlanthe said to appeal to Syria to observe a ceasefire had failed and the situation was getting worse. But any intervention should be a peace-seeking intervention.
Anybody who runs around armed should be knocked on the heads, and those who are in uniform should be pushed back into barracks, and then pits, conditions conducive for dialogue should then be put in place. So there are those kinds of agendas. Unfortunately, we are small fry. We're a big country of great people on issues of human rights. But in this broader scheme of things, in the way the UN Security Council functions, we are non-permanent members. We have no veto power, where we can only use soft power of persuading those with this real veto power to find each other, find a common meeting point, so that an intervention indeed is called for sooner than yesterday in that situation.
There were more questions on the Syrian issue. Mr. Koos van der Merwe of the IFP said South Africa shared global concerns about the situation. However, to him it appeared there was not much that South Africa could do.
My colleague, Mr. Meshu, the Honourable Meshu, has asked you, what can South Africa do? I'm afraid your answer came down to there's actually nothing we can do. We support the resolutions by the United Nations, and we sit back and hope for the best. I think the situation in the whole of North Africa and Syria shows us that there's something wrong which is very big. We've had Saddam Hussein hanged, we had Hosni Mubarak sentenced to life imprisonment, and Libya the same fate. What is to happen to the president of Syria? Is it just going to go on and on and on? Every day we read in the newspaper another 30 or 50 or 100 people died. Isn't there something more constructive that South Africa can do? Thank you.
I did not say we should just sit back and look at the situation as it worsens without doing anything else. I said we need to persuade the powers that be, and that's the best we can do under the circumstances, to ensure that, and it's only really 5 countries which have this veto power, and if we can persuade them to have a consensus position that seeks to create peace, because now peace won't happen of its own, because both sides are now at a point where they believe they can rout each other. So what is required is a peacemaking force to be deployed, and also to defend that peace once attained. That's the best we can do. In the security, in the General Assembly, resolutions can be passed as long as these 5 permanent members, or only one of them, not even all of them, one of them adopts a different view, the entire UN is paralyzed. And of course we know we've had experience of unilateral action in Iraq, for instance. Even today, earlier in the day, bombs exploded in Iraq, which killed more than 60 people. So it's important that the United Nations must take responsibility. And the Security Council was established precisely for this purpose.
But I wonder whether we have explored all possibilities in this regard in terms of what we can do. I mean, we are a member of BRICS. We are a member of an organization which seemingly in the geopolitical world is on the rise and exerts some sort of influence. And I wonder whether within that context, South Africa, as a valued member of that organization, can't exert some sort of influence on Russia and China in that regard to come round to making sure that Syria actually does implement the 6-point plan, because Ban Ki-moon actually indicated that unfortunately every aspect of that 6-point plan Syria had not implemented. And I wonder whether we can't bring our influence to bear in that context. But likewise, in another context, violence is spiraling out of control simply because of the import of arms into that country, primarily from Russia. In fact, this morning it was reported that military helicopters were delivered into Russia to the Syrian government in order to prop up that government. And I wonder whether we should not be promoting a ban on all imports of any type of armament into Russia, into Syria in this context. So we need to exert our influence in BRICS in that regard on our partners there, Russia and China, and we need to promote a complete ban on the import of arms into Syria. I thank you.
The challenge is whether these very members of the permanent members of the Security Council will be willing to send their troops on the ground, because they are the ones who have the power, who have all the sophisticated weaponry and armory. And so if they are willing to commit to send their forces to create peace, it shouldn't be difficult under the UN auspices and supervision. It shouldn't be difficult, and so smaller countries like ourselves can go in and contribute towards the overall peace and stability in that country. But I agree with you that we can't sit back and do nothing about it. We've got to keep on knocking on them, because the situation was much better 2 weeks ago. It is spiraled completely out of control now.
We will have another question to the Deputy President tomorrow. A question from the IFP on the relationship between the executive and political parties. We'll also recap on yesterday afternoon's questions to the ministers in the governance cluster in programs to follow. After the break, we hear why some opposition parties would not support the budget for the presidency. Stay with us.